Our understanding of orgasm has evolved because we really haven't done a lot of research into it. We didn't even know if the G-spot was an actual thing. And it was this kind of myth, but an Australian urologist has recently mapped the G-spot and the clitoris in full and has found out that the G-spot isn't this sort of weird little spot. It's actually a part of the whole entire clitoral network. I think we're in a really interesting time when it comes to sex. Many of us grew up and we didn't receive any education. All of the information we had was quite binary, it was very heterosexual, and it was all about sexual shame, really. Like, the majority of us will be familiar with learning about sex in school, and the only information we received was basically don't have sex, or wait until you're in love with someone of the opposite gender, and you get married, and you have kids, and you have sex for reproduction. So obviously those ideas are really limiting in who can access them, who's interested in them, and they don't make for great sexual experiences. Often my clients will come to me and they'll say, I'm not having great sex, but I actually just don't know what good sex looks like. And because I think when it comes to sex, we're so focused on the performance and being perfect and being amazing and being a really good lover, we put so much pressure on ourselves in achieving rather than just kind of like co-creating and experiencing with someone. So just supporting them with skills, tools, and resources so that they can regulate the distracting thoughts and come back to their body so that they can feel more. Tech and social media is completely changing the way that young people are exploring and understanding their sexuality. Even if we just look at the education that is being served to us online, like I, every single week, am putting out content on fingering techniques, anal 101, kinks and fetishes, and it allows for more people to access this information. And something that I love so much about this younger generation is that they know so much. They know so much about themselves, they know so much about sex, and they are really changing the way that we are all speaking about sex and thinking about sex, so we can learn so much from this younger generation. But I'm also noticing a few challenges that people are facing in that because we are so sex positive, there's now a new kind of pressure that's being placed on people that they need to be really sexual. They need to want sex all the time. They need to want to do really advanced or hardcore sexual acts. A really concerning theme that's showing up for me in session at the moment, a few of my clients are coming and saying that someone choked them during sex without consent, and as a result it has been really triggering and traumatizing for them. And this is a really important topic of conversation because mainstream and hardcore porn is normalizing choking during sex, and it can be a really erotic and fun and kinky thing to explore. However, it is only safe and erotic and fun and kinky and pleasurable if you know exactly what you're doing, because it can be really, really unsafe. So if you are curious about this, you need to do research. And I would even suggest going to seek a professional, a practitioner who specializes in this to teach you how to do this, because of course, when you're choking someone, you're depriving them of oxygen, and there are really, really dangerous repercussions of doing this. So making sure you know exactly what you're doing. But then we also need to talk about consent. So a lot of the time what's happening, they're in a sexual experience, someone's seen it in porn, they think it's normal, and then they're just going straight for their neck. But if you're wanting to explore this, you need to talk about this in depth before. You need to ask, are you actually into this? Okay, so how are we going to keep each other safe? I find it so funny that so many of my clients will say, it's too awkward to talk about sex. It's too awkward to tell my partner what I'm into and what I'm not into, but they don't find it awkward to like stick their tongue in their bumhole. Like, it's language and talking about sex feels like the more vulnerable thing, but getting your clothes off and fingering each other is less awkward. Asking someone how they want to be touched, or what they're into, where they want to be touched, or how they want to touch your body, I think is the sexiest thing. And there are a whole lot of cues that we can look for in non-verbal communication. So if someone is looking distracted, or they're not present, if they're not showing that they're physically really enjoying it, then that, I would say, would be a cause to check in, pause, ask them. If we can approach all sexual experiences where we're thinking, this is another human being, we're co-creating something fun together, I want everyone here to leave feeling really good about themselves, then that is, I would say, that foundation for safety. The key difference between a kink and a fetish is a kink is more about a sexual experience, where a fetish is more about an object or a body part. So for any time we're looking at a fetish, it's referring to when high sexual value or importance is placed on a body part or an object. And for some people, that might mean that they need this thing in order to build arousal in their body or in order to orgasm. But it's certainly not the case for everyone. It just may be that they really like having that present in their sexual experiences. So a really common fetish could be a foot fetish. We hear about this all the time, people talk about it, but it also may be a type of material, or it might be a body part that isn't necessarily considered sexual, like an ear or an elbow. So anything from an object to a body part that is, really important for someone to feel sexual. When we're looking at the kinks and fetishes that are emerging, I think it's interesting because I would say that actually they're not necessarily emerging. They've been around forever. If there is an object out there, there is someone in the world, there are probably many people in the world who are fantasizing about that object, like a camera. I'm sure many people would jack off to thinking about a camera. But because we have access to this information now, it's perhaps normalizing it. And sometimes sex and, fetishes and kinks might not necessarily feel like they're having sex with someone. Like, it might just be going to an event and sploshing. So sploshing is a kink or an act whereby you're using food for play, and you may get a cream pie and some al dente pasta and some sauce and splosh it over all of your bodies. And again, like, that might lead to sex and orgasms for some people, but it might just be food play as a way to feel erotic and energized and connected and, having fun with naked human bodies. There's a kink that I find so fascinating, cake sitting, because these cake sitters earn a lot of money from all they have to do is wear a cool outfit, get a really creamy, like jam-filled, cakey, spongy thing, and just sit on it, and people fucking love it. And I'm aggressively allergic to gluten and dairy, so I also get the joy out of watching that too. I can't eat it. I find talking about fantasies the most fascinating part of human sexuality, because it is maybe the last taboo that we have in talking about sex. Because when we share our fantasies, we hold so much shame around what we're into. It can feel really, really scary and vulnerable. We can feel like these big, freaky, weird sex freaks who just think about these things, and no one else is, having that thought whilst you're masturbating. Our fantasies can be informed by both positive and negative experiences that we've had. So I had this client once, and he identified that when he was younger, he was in the playground and someone dacked him, and it was so humiliating for him. He was completely scarred by it. But later in life, he actually really enjoyed exploring humiliation during sex. So what was once a really negative and triggering and even like traumatic experience for him, that kind of transcended into something that was erotic and fun and powerful for him when he was having sex. Role play is a kink that a lot of people engage in, and some people just think it would just be way too awkward. But then, of course, there are varying degrees of role play. So whether you're talking about someone, calling them mummy or daddy during sex, whether you're actually dressing up and assuming the role of someone. So I heard this story recently, and if you're curious about it, maybe you should give it a go. So they started off assuming the role of a professor and a university student. And they started at the beginning of the day texting each other, and they planned to meet up and have a drink. And while they were there, they, obviously had that power dynamic. There was someone who was in the position of the power, being the university professor, and the doting student, and they played with that throughout the night and until the next day. So you can explore these kinks not just when you're in bed with someone, and I think that so much of this can energize our sexual experiences when we look at kinks and fetishes that can exist beyond naked bodies penetrating each other, but can actually just be a way for us to explore our eroticism and our fantasies. So I'm noticing there is a lot of vanilla shaming at the moment, and that will be things like, why aren't you into this? Missionary is boring. I want to explore all of these advanced sexual experiences. And I think that, because we're in this time that we are speaking so much about sex, and there's so much information around all of these things that we can try, there's now this sort of reversed pressure. It's not just slut shaming, but it's also vanilla shaming. So vanilla shaming is making someone feel bad about things that they don't want to do. And I want to talk about missionary because I think missionary can be one of the best sexual experiences for our bodies. Like, it can be intimate, it can be fun, it can free up your hands so that you can bring in toys and do all of these other things. And if we're looking at vanilla as a flavor, you can add your sprinkles, you can add your chocolate chips, you can add your sauce to it. That if we can start with vanilla and add more on, that's just allowing every person to figure out what great sex looks like for them, free from that judgment and shame that's been kind of reversed from the slut shaming. Porn is often the first education many of us get about sex. And I'm definitely not anti-porn. I think porn can be great. It can make you come, it can support you in learning about your fantasies, it can just be fun. It can also showcase a whole range of experiences that we don't see in movies. A lot of queer people can see sexual experiences for the first time with bodies that they want to have sex with. However, when we're looking at it, I think the type of porn that is useful is ethical porn that showcases consent, and when we can watch it mindfully in knowing this isn't real sex, this is a performance with actors who have mapped everything out, they know exactly what's going to happen, and it's also not a realistic portrayal of what bodies will do during sex. It doesn't teach us anything about safer sex practices or communication. It can also exhibit some quite hardcore and advanced sexual techniques or acts or experiences that have been really normalized, and now people are thinking that to include pain play in sex is just normal, when actually it is something that requires a whole lot of skill and discussion before. What is an orgasm? I think a lot of people want to know. I mean, I would say an orgasm is a peak moment of pleasure. So for many people, that might feel like a leg trembling, eye rolling, full body ejaculation kind of experience. And for others, it might just feel like a gentle release. But if you're just kind of thinking about a sexual experience that if you're starting off at 0 being no arousal, and you can feel the arousal build into your body to like a 10, that is that peak moment of pleasure, you've probably had an orgasm. Our understanding of orgasm has evolved because we really haven't done a lot of research into it, particularly for people with clits. You know, it's really wild that research and ideas about the clit have only emerged over the past decade or so. We didn't even know if the G-spot was an actual thing. And it was this kind of myth that was named after a man. But an Australian urologist has recently mapped the G-spot and the clitoris in full and has found out that the G-spot isn't this sort of weird little spot. It's actually a part of the whole entire clitoral network. So if you're fingering someone and stimulating their G-spot, you're actually stimulating a part of the clitoris just from a new and highly sensitive area. But because so much research hasn't been done into pleasure or orgasms or bodies, because there was a lot of fear and shame around sex and pleasure, we don't know a whole lot, or we're starting to learn more, which I think is a really exciting time for us because the possibilities and the awareness that we have of orgasm and pleasure is just evolving each year. There are different ways of experiencing orgasm. So we could look at the classic that I think a lot of people would identify with, which is your genitals. So by stimulating either the clitoris or the G-spot or the penis or the P-spot, which is accessed through the anus with anyone who has a prostate, that is a pretty classic way that we would identify someone's cum. But there are, of course, many different ways that you could experience it. There's something called a coregasm. So a coregasm is surprising for a lot of people, but it's anytime you're engaging your core, and some of my clients have experienced this when they're at the gym or they're working out or they're on the bike or they're in Pilates and they've had an orgasm. Now, it's not to say that they wanted to fuck the gym or the Pilates or the bike. Maybe they did, but it's more about the physiological arousal and the engagement of their pelvic floor that led to a peak moment of pleasure. Some people have had back orgasms. Some people have had neck orgasms, ear orgasms, nipple orgasms, feet orgasms. In recent years, we've been able to look inside the brain on a neurological level and found that parts of the foot that are being stimulated are really close to the parts in the brain that we receive information that there's been genital stimulation as well. So this is where you might experience something that feels quite overwhelming or exciting or even orgasmic, that looks at any time there's been stimulation of somewhere in your body that isn't necessarily related to the genitals. However, you may also be experiencing something called a blended orgasm. So a blended orgasm is any time multiple erogenous zones are being stimulated at the same time. So say, for example, if you're receiving clit stimulation and internal G-spot stimulation, as well as getting your nipples sucked, your nipples may have sent you over the edge because it's a really sensitive part of the body and it is an erogenous zone, but it might also just be the fact that there were blended experiences of pleasure. There are so many challenges that people face when it comes to experiencing orgasms, and that might be that they don't know how to touch their body, they don't know what will feel good for them, they might think that they're too much in their head and it's really hard to stay present. They may feel like they have challenges in regulating their arousals. So they're either coming too quickly or not coming at all. It may be around their body confidence and feeling comfortable receiving. They may be conditioned to think that they're taking too long or they're too much, or they feel awkward asking for what they want. It might be sexual disgust or shame. It's pretty common for a lot of people to not feel comfortable looking at their genitals or touching their genitals. So these are really common barriers that get in the way between people and, experiencing orgasm. There are 5 tools I would suggest everyone explores if they're wanting to enhance a sexual experience. And these are 5 somatic tools. So the first is breath. When we have sex, the majority of people hold their breath, they squeeze their body, they clench everything. And yes, a tension orgasm can feel good. However, if we're not breathing, it can affect our arousal and it can affect how much pleasure we're experiencing. So using your breath to down regulate and lengthen your exhale, or up regulate and speed in the inhale, is a great tool. Movement. A lot of us, when we have sex, are holding the same position. We're not bringing movement to our hips, but hip rocking or moving your body when you're masturbating, or moving your body when you're with someone else, can do a lot to build and regulate arousal. Sound. So sound can turn us on, it can help us release into pleasure, it can be a great communication tool to enhance sensation. Touch. So touch is what I think we associate with sex a lot, but we are often really specific in the ways that we touch. So exploring different rhythms and pressures and speeds. Like, I can't tell you 10 tips that will blow their mind. That's really up to you to figure it out together. And the final one is placement of awareness. So this is really drawing on Eastern practices of mindfulness and bringing awareness to the body, that anytime you feel your mind is wandering, whether it's thinking about, am I coming too quickly? Why is it taking me so long? Why haven't I done all of the work I needed to do? Just intending to place your awareness back to the pleasure and the sensation that is currently present can allow us to feel more. I think it's a really exciting time for human relationships, because we're really examining and challenging structures that we've been taught are the norm and we've been taught are things that we should be striving for. And now everyone is starting to question, like, what is it that I'm interested and curious about? And I think when it comes to non-monogamy, it's certainly not for everyone. Not everyone will enjoy it or feel safe within it or even value that as a relationship structure or choice. But it is really important that we allow for space for people who it does work for. It's either an identity for them or it's a lifestyle choice. There are so many harmful misconceptions around non-monogamy, and that is that they are just hypersexual sex freaks who just want to fuck. And sure, there may be some of you out there and you love those terms, but for some people it's about love, it's about deep connection. For some people it's not necessarily just about sex, but it forms more a part of their identity and how they want to exist. There are also harmful misconceptions that it's just, a step to breaking up with your partner. And whilst sure, that might be the case for some people, for many people, it allows them to feel closer, more connected, more in love, more desiring of their partner. Recently, I've been working with a couple. They've been married for a few years and they decided that they wanted to start swinging. And swinging for them was attending sex parties. And one of them was perhaps more keen and interested and excited, and the other one was curious but really nervous. So we spent a lot of time. We spent months working on communication and boundaries and safety, what it looks like, how they're going to support each other before, during, and after. And when they went to their first sex party, it was really fun. It was really positive for them, but they only had sex with themselves, and they were so turned on by watching everyone around them and knowing that they were choosing each other, that they had sex there but then went home and had an even better time. So I think when we can really learn how to co-create that sexual experience for the couple, draw on information and theories and modalities and approaches, but really it was just them figuring out how they wanted to structure their relationship. If you're in a monogamous relationship and you're a bit curious about non-monogamy, I totally get that it can feel quite daunting bringing this up with your partner, especially if you care for them. You don't want to hurt them, you want to respect them, you want them to feel safe. So it's always, I think, useful to find a time that feels great for both of you. So not just before sex, not during sex, and not just after sex, but maybe a specific time where you have a relationship check-in. And it might be saying something like, hey, I've been doing a bit of reading into non-monogamy, or I've seen this thing or listened to this podcast and I'm kind of curious about it. I'm not saying that I want to jump into it straight away, but I just wanted to raise it with you and see what your thoughts are and whether you have any curiosities around it. Knowing or well that they may not be into it. It may be too much for them, too daunting and not exciting, and that's okay. You know, they've voiced that boundary. But then it is also a really useful piece of information for you so that you're still allowed to express yourself and be who you want to be as a sexual person. I think when people are approaching non-monogamy, a really big fear is feeling jealous. And whilst not everyone will experience jealousy, it is a common part of being a human being. And if you are ever experience jealousy within your relationship, I think a really great question to ask yourself is, what do I need in this moment? And what is this emotion or this response or this trigger trying to tell me? And that might be, I want my partner to look at me in that way, or I want to do something really romantic, or I feel like they've been prioritizing this new love and I've been kind of getting left behind whilst they're in this sort of new relationship energy, this limerence, and I want them to bring that back to me. So taking that time to reflect, why am I feeling this and what do I need and how can we work towards getting that so everyone feels really good in the relationship. So attachment styles are a theory that suggests your primary relationship that you had with a parent or someone has shaped or can shape how you currently show up in your relationships. So again, it is a theory, and I think that it can make a lot of sense for a lot of people and provide a framework to learn how to address it and feel more safe and comfortable in their current relationships. And there are 4 key attachment styles. The first is secure. So secure is essentially you feel safe, you feel grounded, you feel regulated, you're comfortable with your partner going away and doing their own thing and knowing they're going to come back, but ultimately there's that sense of security in the relationship. Then we have anxious attachment. So that is the feeling that you're always needing to be closer. You never feel like you can get enough. Maybe you're really stressed and anxious about the future of your relationship. Avoidant. Avoidant refers to any time you feel maybe threatened or unsafe and you want to push away, or you want to punish them. Maybe they didn't say I love you back and you no longer want to be close to them and you're not going to respond to their texts and you're avoiding the connection with them. And then we have disorganized or chaotic attachment. And this refers to anytime someone has experienced trauma. So whilst this isn't as common as the other 3, it is very real. So this is feeling more chaotic in your attachment style and your relationship dynamics. Thanks so much for joining me. I'm G-Spot. If you're curious and you're wanting to learn more, just know that you're normal and sometimes the first step isn't that awkward.